This video is one of the videos from a course entitled MBTI Learning Styles, a Practical Approach for Educators, Parents, and Learners. This course is available on Udemy, Teachable, and Thinkific. If you're interested in just the book, which is also part of this course, you can find it on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle versions. Let's look at introverts now. Now, introversion is the exact opposite or in contrast to the extroverts. So this is exactly how one relates to the world and where one gets their energy. We've discussed that a little bit in another lecture. But one thing we want to remember is that voice of warning, or that to keep in mind the statistical side of the MBTI. Remember that if somebody were to say that they were an introvert, on their statistical information or on their test assessment, the official assessment, you may say that they are 53% introvert and 47% extrovert. So let's remember always that when you're talking about an introvert, an extrovert, a thinker, a judger, perceiver, whatever it may be of these preferences, that there is a spectrum between 0% all the way up to 100%. So the way to think about this may be, well, you know, I remember one time my father saying, this child is so shy, she's scared of her shadow. Think of that. You know people like that, don't you? The people that are so quiet, you wonder if you looked at them wrong, if they'd start crying, right? They don't want to be noticed at all. So we may say that their introversion, maybe they're at a 90%, 99%, right? But this introvert here, who is at a 53%, in some cases may actually look more like an extrovert. So let's be very careful when we try to pigeonhole people and really instead focus on how we can individualize a learning experience. Notice here, this is that same 16 type graph that we've talked about before. And if you look towards the center, look at how the introverts are right in the middle. I enjoy this part. And one of the reasons that I like this is because when you look at it, you kind of think, or you can say, wow, they're protected. They're protected or isolated from, by those extroverts. They're isolated from the others. And why is that important? It's important because it gives us that insight of how they like to spend time away from the outer world, right? They want to be inwards. They want to reflect. They want to be alone. They get their energy from being with themselves. Okay, as an introvert, remember, we're really dealing with extroverts on a daily basis. Now, we look and we say, wow, introversion is 50.5% of the total population. And that is correct. It is, right? But you have to be able to function in an extroverted world. And how can you do that? How can you be an introvert in an extroverted situation? Now, I'm not going to answer that question for you. I want you to think about that. If you are an introvert, how can you still function in an extroverted world? What are some little steps you can take? I will give one idea or one suggestion. I love this. When I was really struggling and I was that child in the corner, the introvert that was scared of one's shadow, I remember that I had a teacher that said one time, just say hello to a stranger just once and see what happens. It's not that scary. And so I did. And guess what? They smiled and said hello back. And it wasn't scary. So we can help our introverts to be able to still function in an extroverted situation and then retreat back into where they need to be to get their energy. Remember that your learner keyword is reflective. You want to keep that in mind with everything that you do. Reflective. They like to reflect. What is reflection? When you think about what reflection is, a reflection or a reflective moment is when you're quiet. Maybe it's how you want to envision it, but for me, I envision reflection of that yoga stance. You know, the one where you've got your legs crossed, you're quiet, and you're just sitting still. Reflective. And maybe that's not always the way it needs to be, but that happens to be the way in which I can relate to the introverted side and to remember the reflective keyword. Our learner question that goes along with this is, will I receive sufficient time to reflect on this information? This may seem like a silly question, but this really is a fear almost at times for students as they walk into a situation or into a classroom. They wonder, how am I going to relate with this educator? Is this educator going to give me time to think? Am I going to have enough time to finish my assignments? How am I going to deal with these kinds of things? This is always a concern for the introvert. So let's remember reflective and having sufficient time to reflect. Their learning style. This probably is not in the least bit surprising, is it? They're energized through quiet times of reflection so that they can integrate or weave, knit, remember we used those words before, but weave and knit that new information into existing knowledge. And you want to be able to make those connections, because as they weave and they make those connections for all learners, it makes it easier to recall the information. Quiet, reflective, mental processing, observation. These are all great words to think of when you're thinking about the learning style of an introvert. They really still want to be understood though. And many times your introvert is going to lack an ability to speak up. They won't be able to share their impressions, and they can't share their thoughts or the connections and the patterns that they're seeing. And it's not because they are not smart enough, but because they simply don't know how to put these items and these thoughts into words. They also may be just extremely shy, that they just absolutely cannot make it work. However, they will figure things out completely while thinking before they're going to talk at all. So one of the best things that you do as an educator is making sure that you don't volunteer an introvert. Do not volunteer them. They will absolutely just freeze up. You don't want that. They will be able, though, to observe, to listen, and to study for long stretches of time. They do not need interruptions. They don't need frequent breaks. These are their strengths, the ability to sit for long periods. Let's take a peek at their cognitive environment. Again, quiet contemplation. Now, one of the things that really is going to help them with that reflection and contemplation points is those thought-provoking questions. You're going to give them some thought-provoking questions, things that are really going to spark some interest and to help them to construct that scaffolding process while contemplating. Okay, so here's your questions, and you're going to say, what about bop, bop, bop? And then you're going to give them space to think about it, space to consider it, space to be able to really work over that information. Now, they can be social when they're learning, but working with a partner would be best for them rather than a large group. And even though they can do partner work, they still are going to need that quiet time. They're going to need some kind of process before they can really participate. So before they can sit down with a partner, they need a few moments to think through what is going on before they can jump in. Now, lectures, those work wonderful for the introverted, right, or the introverted learner, right? As well as reading and writing. They excel in reading and writing work. Why? Because it's quiet work. It's solitary. It's independent. So for teacher tips, as an educator, let's look at how you can really assist these students. We want to be able to specify and individualize their learning instructions. And we want to give them some standards to aid them into understanding what is expected. So if you look on the slide, it says specific instructions. That's what they want. They want specific instructions. They want someone to teach them how to gather this information. They want to someone to teach them how to link it to the prior knowledge. They want the opportunity to volunteer at times, but they never want to be forced into participation. They're going to need that really a great amount of time to have quiet and process, and they prefer the silence to be able to work independently. So now if you're looking at a large classroom and maybe you have a mixture of extroverts and introverts, one thing that is very simple to do, and I've used this process in my own classrooms, is pull your extroverts into one group on one side of the classroom, give your introverts the other side. Your introverts, you're going to assign them a partner and let them work and do their group work. Whereas the extroverts, you're going to give them a group and say, here it is. Now, they're working on the same activity, but the difference is that you've given those introverts a little bit of space to be able to really think and to be able to have just one partner instead of being overwhelmed by a variety of people imposing upon their own learning space and their learning abilities. Learner tips. So if you're the learner who's an introvert, there's really this, I know this sounds really strange, but you have a great advantage over other learners. Why is that? Because you really excel in a traditional classroom. You can walk into a lecture on a campus and you're going to be great. You're not going to have to worry about integrating new information and being able to work in a situation that you're not familiar with and having to sit still and you can't touch things and you can't move and you can't talk to your partner. No, those are the things that an extrovert deals with. But as an introvert, you've got plenty of quiet during the lecture to reflect and to be able to work on that new information. Now, as you walk away from a learning situation, though, make sure that you have plenty of time to really work through the information. One of the things that I have done as an introvert is taking my notes on 4x6 cards or 3x5 cards. And as I walked across campus to my next class, was being able to briefly skim through those notes and reflect on them while I was walking. And that gave me those 10-15 minutes of quiet, but it also gave me an opportunity to reassess what I've learned. Try using some graphic organizers. Those are wonderful. They really aid in that visual aspect and note-taking skills. Really specify and perfect your ability to take notes. One great option is to remember to leave space on the edge of your paper. I usually take a ruler and I'll just slice it right down the side and give myself 2 inches or so, and that's where I can put additional notes. The additional notes are going to help me to build around the existing knowledge that I have. So this is where I'm going to notice patterns and take into account anything that is essential for me to be able to really recall the new information. Annotate your reading, write in your books, do whatever you need to do. Don't worry about it. I know we've got a stipulation where we say don't write in your books. If you have a textbook that is borrowed or you have rented it, use Post-it notes. Post-it notes are a wonderful way to be able to note inside of a book. As for rubrics and objectives, don't be scared to do that. Be sure that you grasp all the details. If you have to work in a group situation, find a partner instead. See if there's an opportunity that you can work with a partner instead of a group. Or the other option you can use is looking for a group dynamic where you are mostly introverts. Or maybe you have that one extrovert who wants to be the leader and helps out. But listen to what's going on and really ask people what they're thinking. Try pairing up with an extrovert sometimes. Now, the interesting thing about pairing up with an extrovert, although they're going to impose upon your reflection time, the extrovert processes information verbally. Now remember, as an introvert, where do you learn? You like that lecture part, right? So you're going to learn by listening to their process. Quite cool, huh? So keep a learning journal. This is one of my favorite things to do, is making sure that you have a place to write down thoughts and impressions, and not just thoughts and impressions on how you're learning, but maybe there are other questions or thoughts of things that you have learned that you want to recall later. Search for other learning options. Maybe there are other references and sources. One of my favorite things to do as an introverted learner is I like to be able to jump in, and I like to learn as much as I can about something. So if I have an idea in a class, I will go and YouTube it. I look up TED Talks. I find some way to be able to take in more information. Most of all is to personalize your experience. Make sure that you record your dislikes and your likes, and that you're able to individualize your learning experience to meet your needs.